So, what happens when a centuries old border dispute, a surge in militant attacks, and a refugee crisis all collide? You get what's happening right now between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Today, we're breaking down this escalating conflict, a crisis with roots that stretch all the way back to the age of empires. To really get a handle on it, we have to start with the one declaration that changed everything. It really doesn't get much blunter than this. In early 2026, Pakistan's defense minister made this stunning declaration. It was a clear signal that all those long simmering tensions had finally, officially, boiled over into a full-blown military confrontation. But how on earth did it get to this point? All right, so to understand the why, we first have to look at the what. This conflict didn't just simmer, it exploded in late 2025, and it went from border skirmishes to aerial bombardments incredibly quickly. The escalation was just so fast. It all started with some fierce fighting back in October 2025. But then, Pakistan's hugely controversial decision to expel Afghan refugees just threw gasoline on the fire. By February 2026, both sides were launching airstrikes on each other's territory. And that's what led to that open war declaration. This wasn't just a border clash anymore. It had become a full-blown regional crisis. And at the heart of all this fighting, all this animosity, it really all comes down to one thing: a 2,300-kilometer line drawn on a map over a century ago. A line that Afghanistan's leaders have consistently and very publicly called imaginary. This is it, the Durand Line, and you've got two completely different realities here. For Pakistan, which inherited this border from British India in 1947, it's a done deal. It's a settled international boundary recognized under law. But for Afghanistan, no way. It has never been seen as legitimate, not under the king, not under the communists, and certainly not under the Taliban. And if you look at the map, you can really see why Afghanistan objects. The Durand Line doesn't follow a natural barrier, like a river or a mountain range. No, it just slices right through the heart of the Pashtun homeland, dividing tribes, clans, and even families. For many Afghans, it's not a border, it's an artificial scar left behind by a colonial power.
So this leaves you with two positions that just can't be reconciled. On one hand, Pakistan stands on a principle of international law. It's essentially that they legally inherited the borders from the state that was there before them, British India. But on the other hand, Afghanistan argues, hold on a second. They say the original agreement was never about creating a permanent sovereign border. It was just a temporary line to manage influence, signed by an Afghan leader who was under immense British pressure.
And this really is the key question, isn't it? To answer it, we have to go back to the source, to the height of the British Empire, and its fear of a rival. You see, the Durand Line wasn't drawn to create a nation. It was a strategic calculation in a geopolitical chess match between two global powers. The story begins with the Great Game, that long struggle for dominance in Central Asia between Britain and Russia. Britain, terrified of a Russian advance on its prize colony of India, needed a buffer zone. The solution, negotiated by Sir Mortimer Durand, wasn't to create a clear border like we think of today. The goal was simply to establish a line defining each empire's sphere of influence. It was, well, intentionally ambiguous. In fact, Durand himself said the line wasn't about annexing territory. The tribes on the British side were not British subjects. They were just under British influence. And that right there, that historical ambiguity, is what every single Afghan government since has seized upon to deny the line's validity as a sovereign border. But, a historical grievance alone doesn't start a war. The reason this dispute is exploding now is because that 19th century line is under immense 21st century pressure. First, there's the critical issue of cross-border militancy. Pakistan is facing a devastating wave of attacks from the TTP, or Pakistani Taliban, and it accuses the Afghan Taliban of giving them safe haven. At the same time, Pakistan's policy of expelling refugees has created a huge humanitarian crisis and immense public anger in Afghanistan. For the Taliban, loudly rejecting the Durand Line is a powerful tool to rally nationalist support. And for decades, Pakistan has pursued a policy of strategic depth, using these tribal areas as a buffer to project influence. It's just a toxic mix of modern security threats layered right on top of a colonial-era wound. So with two nuclear-armed neighbors exchanging fire, one official, one de facto, the international community has responded with some pretty urgent calls for calm. The United Nations immediately voiced its concern. The Secretary General's office called for a return to diplomacy and reminded both sides of their obligation under international law to protect civilians. China, a major regional power with significant interests in both countries, expressed deep concern and immediately offered to play a constructive role in mediating and trying to cool the situation down. and from the United Kingdom, the very country whose imperial history is at the origin of this conflict. The foreign secretary urged both sides to step back from the brink and get back to talking. Beyond the major powers, the entire region is on high alert. Iran, Russia, Turkey, and others have all gotten involved diplomatically, offering to mediate. The fear is clear. A full-scale war between Afghanistan and Pakistan wouldn't be contained. It would risk destabilizing all of Central and South Asia. And that leaves us with the fundamental question. The conflict is about modern grievances, terrorism, refugees, and regional power plays. But its soul is a dispute over history, identity, and a line drawn to serve an empire that no longer exists. The challenge for diplomats isn't just to secure a ceasefire. It's to find a way to reconcile a legacy of the past with the deadly realities of the present.